So hi Ryan, we are at the Jukebox HQ in Paris. It's cool to have you here and to see you there. You've been leading some engineering courses in France for 2 weeks. So can you tell us a little bit more about this new stuff for you?
Yeah, I've been interested in teaching seminars for quite a while, because I think that as we were talking about earlier, like the disconnect between assistant or apprentice and engineering and mixing and producing is very apparent these days with the lack of studios. You know, so no one, very few people get the experience that I had coming up as an intern and assistant and then engineer and then mixer and so on, with this sort of traditional journeyman approach to learning this craft. You know, because this is a craft, this is an art. Totally. So teaching seminars to young and old professionals of all ages, of all abilities, has been it's just really exciting. I started a company in the United States called Studio Prodigy to do exactly this, actually about a year ago now. Okay. And I did a seminar, and Ross Hogarth did a seminar, and Al Schmidt did one as well in Los Angeles.
All right.
You know, Mix with the Masters has been doing extremely well and really great work from what I hear. And so the one I did is a company called Audio Creative Factory. It's the Mao Center for, what is it called? Yes, there's the MAO Center in Toulouse. And so Jan Serra over there called me up and said, would you like to teach 2 weeks of seminars in France? And I said, of course I would. You know, yes, I'd love to. Michael Wagner came over in November and did the same thing, and it was a big success. So we did a week in Paris at Studio de la Chine, not far from here, and a week in Toulouse at the Creative Center's headquarters. Cool. And yeah, it was really fun. People of all ages and from all over France. It's only for French people who are professional and earn their living in the music industry. And so we had engineers who were just starting out, who had just graduated some recording school or had a bedroom studio. And then we have guys who are in their 50s and 60s who are songwriters and composers, and engineers who've done commercials their whole lives and wanted to know about making rock records. You know, or mixing or whatever. So it was pretty amazing. Like really, yeah, a broad range of attendees, and just the nicest people. Like I was just so impressed with the quality of people who came, and just how cool they were, and how open to absorbing new ideas and knowledge that they were. It's a really incredible experience.
Cool, that's great. So you had a good time.
Yeah,
definitely.
It was pretty awesome.
With good food as well, and good wine.
Oh, food and wine. Yeah, there was no shortage of that.
Before we talk about your working methods and ethics, I'd like to go back to the beginning of your career, because I've read that you're a drummer, a musician, and your father, David Hewitt, is one of the founder of the record plant remote service. Yeah, just can you tell us a little bit more about how you started and why, and did your dad have a major influence on your work?
Well, you know, growing up, my dad had the coolest job in the world. You know, no one else on the block had their father going out recording the Rolling Stones or U2 or, you know, these type of people. And I was just fascinated, as any kid would be, and I liked cars and trucks, and so here's a truck, and here's music, and here's travel to a 13-year-old. That's like the coolest thing on the planet. And so from a very young age, I wanted to, and I was also sort of forced to go out with my father on the road in the summertime between school, mainly to get me out of the house and get me out of my mother's hair. And it was sort of, you know, forced labor for my father, who didn't have to really pay me. Just kidding. He paid me like $2 an hour. It was the longest internship known to man. So I started when I was 13 and worked every summer and every break that I had from school for my dad. After school in the shop, when we finally moved to Pennsylvania, had the truck in the backyard at the house. We had a 10-acre property out in the country, and so the truck was in the barn behind our house at that point. So yeah, so I worked after school and during summers, vacations, what have you, and Yeah, it was pretty great. So I mean, my first recordings, yeah, I had a little cassette studio and a little 1/4-inch, you know, 2-track when I was, you know, 10, 11, 12 years old. But then my first real band recording was a Neve VR and a 24-track studio. So
great conditions.
it was, yeah, I was pretty spoiled. We had 87s and, you know, nice microphones and things like this that I got to record my high school bands with. But you know, my father was very supportive of being in the business, and of course had an influence on me because I learned how to, you know, this is how I like to get my kick drum sound, this is how I like to get my vocal sound, I'm very cautious about this, I'm very you know, open to this idea. But it wasn't until I went to college for electrical engineering, it's his idea, is get an education in something legitimate that you can fall back on if you decide you don't want to be a recording engineer. He said, you know, go get this degree, and when you finish, we'll discuss. If you really want to be a recording engineer, I'll support you in this idea. And there are so many people you can learn from, you don't really need to go to college for this. Instead, go do this, have a different way of thinking of music, of engineering, and, you know, in a more empirical way than, like people who come out of recording schools, I think can be a little narrow-minded about, like, well, this is how I was taught to do X, Y, and Z. Rather than go and learn that from 10 guys making hit records, there's 10 different ways of doing this, or infinite ways of doing any one thing. They'll go to a school and say, this is the way to do this, this is the way to do this. And so it becomes sort of a, or can become, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, because there's many very brilliant people who come out of recording schools. But it can be a little narrowing to me. And I prefer getting experience in the studio and learning from the guys that I want to emulate. That was the biggest education to me. And so when I went to school for engineering, I spent all my time outside of the classroom doing music. So I actually took over the company, the campus sound company. So we had like a little sound reinforcement company to do local gigs. And I took that over, bought all new equipment. You know, at the time the Mackie 8 bus was the cool thing to have. And so I'm thinking, what else how can I do this so I can record surreptitiously without anybody knowing? So I started buying all this gear for sound reinforcement, and then I had the keys to the warehouse, and at night and on weekends I'd go in and bring bands in and do live to DAT demos. Or and then I got like a DA88, the Tascam machine, and I would do 8-track recordings and mix it down afterwards, and I thought I was all hot shit, you know, doing these little illicit recordings. But I recorded like every band on campus and did all these demos, and I was like, wow, this is exciting. This is what I want to be doing. And all my friends are sitting there doing, you know, FFT transfer, like formulas and, you know, derivative problems and stuff like that. I'm like, this sucks. This is bullshit. I mean, this is cool, and I didn't realize at the time how cool that was. Like, I wish I could go back and like design my own compressor, things like this. Maybe in the future I can have time to play with that a little bit more, because it is exciting. Like, you know, all my friends who make this cool equipment have that knowledge and use it every day, of course. But to sit at the desk and think about like what that filter is doing and what that compressor is doing, and be able to fix stuff when it's broken, have an idea of signal flow. These are the things that I learned, I think, from electrical engineering. Yeah, and it also, it ignited the passion to record out of boredom. You know, I'm like, I don't want to sit in front of a computer all day, and I guess that's what I do now. So it's a little.
It's funny.
It is. It's rather amusing and ironic. Yes.
So this is your electrical engineering period, but then you moved to Sony Studios to assist. First, how did you make the move to from the school to the Sony Studios, and then what did you learn there actually?
Well, you know, again, like, and I say this all the time, and I mean it every single time. I feel so fortunate and so blessed to have a father in this business, and to not only that, but have a dad who cares about about my experience in life and what I get to do. And so from a young age, I started going to these AES shows. You know, I can remember going to one probably when I was 15, and earlier than that, going to record plant parties where he worked in New York, and meeting Dave Thoner and meeting Jack Douglas and all these guys when I was this tall, you know, when I was just a boy. And so I would meet all these people through the years, and it just came to pass that the former manager of Record Plant, Paul Sloman, managed Sony Studios. And so I was looking for an internship, and my father called him, and he arranged for me to have an internship. I worked for free for 2 summers at Sony, and worked my ass off and worked harder than everybody else, and was asked to come back, and they gave me a job. I had to fight for that. You know, everyone else wanted a job too, but I was one of the only interns who got a job afterwards. And once I got that job as a runner, $5 an hour, after a $100,000 education in electrical engineering, living in New York City on $5 an hour was a chore. But again, I worked harder than everybody else, and I got promoted pretty quick to assistant. Thanks to I mean, the short stories, I took a gig that no one else wanted as an engineer on like 4th of July weekend. One of the techs got a free day of studio time, and he asked every assistant to do it. They all said no. He asked every runner to do it, and I was the last guy because I was the newest. I said, fuck yeah, I'll do it. And I came in on the 4th of July, big holiday in America, and recorded this thing, and it just so happens that his friend walks in, who is a big engineer, and says, who are you? I said, well, I'm just a runner. He's like, not anymore, you're my assistant next week. And actually, ironically, we worked on a French band called La Place. The next week, I was assisting Kirk Yano, who's a great engineer in America, a very good friend of mine, and we were mixing this band La Place, and I learned so much from him. He kicked my ass up and down the studio, and taught me so much. And so then I became, you know, like the low man on the totem pole for assisting, and I assisted all the staff engineers because they had to make sure I was good enough to assist guest engineers, and they kicked my ass up and down the studio, and apparently I was a smart ass, and so they made me assist Michael Brower, and that was the biggest challenge of my life, was sitting in the chair next to that guy, you know, this big mixer guy, you know, just like, wow, okay, I gotta up my game now. I gotta take it to the next level. And so I got rid of my smartass routine, and because I have a very interesting sense of humor, and I like to be a little silly and, you know, whatever. But and you know, I thought I knew so much because I got promoted so quickly, and I had this little thing going. And as soon as I was in the room with Michael Brower, who really did know what was going on, and who knew what was going on, and like had it together, I was like, oh, I'm not that guy. I want to be that guy. I want that guy's job, but I'm not that guy, and I'm going to sit over here and I'm going to learn how to do that. And so that part of me was gone instantaneously when I sat down in that room the first day. And so I worked with Michael. He kicked my ass up and down the studio again for 2 years, and you know, was very tough to work for, but always very fair. If I fucked up, you know, he called me on it, and I, you know, yep, that's my bad. I'll never do that again, and I would never do that again. Whatever that was, I would never do that again. He could sense things, like he would be sitting in the front of the room, I'd be sitting behind his wall of racks, bouncing my foot, and he'd turn around and look at me between the crack in the rack and say, stop doing that. You know, or I'd be back there taking a nap, having been in the studio till 5 in the morning the night before. He's like, you falling asleep back there? You know, no, not at all. Yeah, I didn't think so. You know, he had like eyes in the back of his head, and to this day he's one of my very dear friends, and huge mentor in my career. So I worked for him. I worked for Elliot Shiner. Worked for Phil Ramone, Bob Power, some really great
top engineers,
inspirational engineers who taught me so much about how to, you know, make great records, and how to just, beyond how to make great records, how to be a good person. Because all these guys I've mentioned are like really stand-up guys, and just the top.
It's a balance between personal and professional life.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other topic that we can have lots of beers and discuss. But
Exactly, yeah.
But you know, those guys taught me how to be professional and how to get the job done in very different ways. You know, Bob Power makes a record completely differently than Elliot Shiner, completely differently than Michael Brower, but those guys are friends, and the common thread is listening and having your personality come through in the record. Like Michael is, you know, has a very distinct personality, and that comes across in the record. He is the boss. He is the boss of that mix, and he's gonna kick that mix's ass, and that's what it sounds like. It sounds like. Yeah. That's what his mixes sound like to me, like, And then, you know, Elliot is like very hi-fi and also in control, but in a very different way. Yeah. And then Bob is like, it has, like, if you meet Bob, like, you'll understand his personality, and like you listen to his mixes, like, well, yeah, that's a Bob Power mix. Yeah, and same like with Mandy Marican and Tony, like their personalities, when you meet them, you listen to their records again, like, I hear that guy, I hear that fedora hat in the mix. I mean, it's totally ridiculous to say that, but
no, it's true.
When you meet these guys and then hear their mixes, you understand where that mix comes from.
I've met Michael, and he was explaining to me that he asked his assistant to record the colors of the patch cables, just to make sure that every patch cables were the same for the records and stuff like that. So, and
that's his thing. It's great.
We were talking about Sony Studios. Then you move to LA. You go to Cello Studios.
Yes.
How did you make the move as well from New York to LA? Why? And what did you discover differently from New York in LA?
It's funny. I mean, another event in my fortunate career was, well, part of working with Michael Brower was we were working together, and then SSL 9000 came out. And so I was one of the first assistants at Sony to learn the console along with my buddy Dave Swope. And so when Brower wanted to move to the 9K, I got to meet all the guys from SSL, Don Wershba and a bunch of other guys in New York who have all kind of left now. Don's still there. But I started working for SSL and teaching people how to use the 9K in New York. And they also had the Axiom MT come out at the same time, which was like a digital version of that console, and I taught people how to use that as well. And just about the time I was getting sick of New York City, their guy in LA quit. And they said, hey, can you come out? We need you to come to LA right away to take this guy's position, at least temporarily, and see if you like it. And okay, cool. So I go to LA, and it turned out to be this incredible job of basically going to every studio in Los Angeles and updating software on SSL 9000s, like pretty much every day. And again, teaching people how to use them, helping the sales guys to sell them to engineers and producers and studios and this kind of thing. And so in the process, I met every studio engineer, every studio manager in LA, and many great producers and engineers that I otherwise would not have come across. And as a result, I met Candace and Gary at Cello when we sold them a 9K, and I installed it and taught people how to use it, blah, blah, blah. Ran into Jim Scott in the hallway at Cello, as we do. We were talking earlier about the magic of big multi-room facilities, just like running into this guy and that guy. Hey, what are you doing? What are you working on? I just happened to run into Jim Scott, who I'd met briefly in New York City. And he's like, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm working for SSL installing this console. He's like, why are you doing that? I said, well, it's, you know, and I told him the whole story. He's like, oh, that's cool. You should work here. And I said, well, that would be nice. That would be very cool. A week goes by. I run into him again. Because basically, whenever I didn't have anything to do with the office, I'd go to Cello because it was just fun to hang out with those guys. There's always there's always something going on. Someone making a cool record. Bill Bottrell was there at the time. It was this whole just magic time at that studio. Jerry Finn was there. Jerry Harrison from the Talking Heads was there. Rich Costi was there. Like, you know, Dave Schiffman was engineering a record here. Andrew Sheps was over there. Rick Rubin was in this room. Jim Scott, of course. And so there was this hub of like intense energy happening at this studio. And so I wanted to hang out there whenever I could. And so again, I ran into Jim Scott in the hall. He's like, hey, my assistant just quit out of nowhere. He's been working for me for 3 years. He just quit. He's done with the business. He's going to work on his parents' farm. You want to work for me? I said, yes. I went to SSL and I quit that day. And that was September 10th. The next day, September 11th happens. And I'm like, oh shit, I don't have a job, because like now all the studio productions have been postponed, everything is up in the air in America, it's all crazy, and of course everything sort of settled down and came back, but then I worked with Tom Petty and the Chili Peppers and like all these great records in a row with Jim Scott, and yes, I mean, working in New York was very different from LA, very different vibe, like it's cool, man, you know, everything's fine.
Yeah.
It had to be professional, but there was this veneer of like, or it's not a veneer because it's not artificial, but there's this sort of glowing sense of cool in California that's a little more relaxed. Shit's still got to get done and be tight like in New York, but it's just a little more relaxed.
Okay.
And Jim was very different than Michael. You know, Michael's like very precise, very precision, you know, lots of outboard gear, all this kind of thing. Whereas Jim was like big Neve console, big Fairchild compressor, big Gates compressor, go. And that was, you know, plate, slap, I can mix anything. You know what I mean? Like that was his sort of attitude, like the complete opposite, like hardly any outboard gear. And it's just like mixed in 3 hours, you know, boom, cool, it's done, this is my sound. And, you know, we did a lot of recording, a lot of mixing, learned a lot from Jim, again, like very dear friend and you know, mentor to me. And so that's where I started getting my gigs, you know, was working with Jim. Again, like sort of discussing earlier, you know, Jim runs out of time to do this gig, so he's like, hey, you go in that room and you do it. Okay, cool. Now I'm working with John Frusciante. It's like, what is this? You know, how did I get here? But, you know, again, like just keeping that work ethic, again, talking about earlier, keeping that work ethic going and working harder than everybody else, working harder than the guy in the chair you want to be in. Because when I sat down with Jim, I was like, this is incredible. Jim has got such a great vibe going here. He's got his tapestries and his, you know, Christmas lights and all his cool gear and his old microphones and everything set up in a very certain way. This is what I want to do. I want his chair. I want to be Jim Scott. Like I want to do what he does. And so I observed and tried to stay a step ahead of him. And you know, must have done something right because he would give me these jobs. And that's sort of how everything progressed. The long story.
The long story. But that's a very, very cool and interesting story.
It's a lot of fun, and the thing that I think about most in the progression from, you know, intern with my dad at age 13 to, you know, engineer and mixer and producer at age 39 is nose to the grindstone. You know, is keeping your wits about you and recognizing opportunity. You know, people say to never work for free and this kind of thing, but I wouldn't have gotten where I am without working for free. You know, at some stage in my life, at some crucial stage in my career, there's always been some kind of freebie, whether it's producing a mix, producing an EP for a shitty little punk band that I then gave to Jerry Finn to get a Blink-182 job, or doing a test mix for Rick Rubin to get the Red Hot Chili Peppers record. There's recognizing these opportunities is very crucial
Well, you have to be
in
involved.
business.
Yeah.
You have to be involved. You have to be out and about. You have to insert yourself into the place you want to be. You know, if you want to be the top engineer and mixer, you got to work for the top engineer and mixer and find out how that guy does his thing, and then absorb that and then move on to the next guy, and find these places to learn. You know, and if it's not working for these guys, it's then taking a seminar with them, reading about it, but finding information from the place you want to be, not the place that's next to you or the place that's beneath you, as many of these online forums are. It's like guys arguing over which $100 Chinese tube condenser sounds best. That doesn't matter. Like, look at the guys who are making the successful records that you want to make, and find out what they're using, and find out how they think and how they hear and what they're listening for in the $100 Chinese capsule tube microphone, or what have you. Whatever it is you're looking for. It's not about the piece of gear, it's about how you use it and what you're listening for. Like, I can use a shitty little microphone to get a very high fidelity sound, but I have to think about how I'm going to do that. You know, which shitty little microphone? Just put one in my hand and I will find a sound with it. It doesn't matter. You know, yes, I'd like to have X, Y, and Z. You know, I'd like to have this piece of outboard gear. I'd like to have this mic pre. Okay, but today I don't. So what am I going to do? I'm going to use this one.
And do the best with it.
And I'm going to do the best. It's still going to be my sound because I place the microphone, I EQ it, I compress it, I do whatever. If I don't have the optimal setup, I go to plugins or, you know, find a new way of doing things. But I'm still listening, and I'm still looking for the sound that is mine.
In this piece of equipment.
In this, with this, you know, with this player, with this instrument in this room today. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's all of these things that it's like, oh, but why wouldn't you use this? Well, I don't have that today, so I'm not using that today.
I understand. So you're making the bridge to what I wanted to talk about, which is gear and the way you work and the pieces of outboards, microphone stuff you're using. I've seen that you have quite a broad collection of outboards and equipment. You set up your own studio 1 year, 2 years ago, maybe more. What do you have? What do you use? Why? What do you love? What do you always use on your sessions? Let's talk maybe a little bit more about the record process. How do you set up a record session, and which microphones do you use, for example? I know you're fond of heavy microphones. Why? What do you use? What do you love?
I mean, the thing about, I mean, if we want to start at the beginning of a recording session, when I get things set up, I'm set up for everything. You know, when I record, when I was assisting Jim Scott, and now when I record for Rick Rubin, and when I do my own productions, I want to be ready for anything. Okay. So, being from a remote background, a remote recording background, I have spare everything set up. So not only do I have the drums, my usual drum mics, you know, kick inside, kick outside, sub kick, snare top, snare bottom, toms, cymbals, hi-hat, room, blah, blah, blah. I'll have an extra couple microphones sitting around just in case, oh, we need to do a percussion overdub. Yep, I got that, no problem. Oh, we need like a crazy room sound. Yep, I got that, no problem. It's sitting right there, ready to go. And with Rick, everything's live, so we do drums, bass, guitars, vocals, fiddle, whatever's in the band that's present, everything's recorded all together.
At the same time.
Yeah, at the same time, because it's all about the feel, you know, of getting a take of a song, and you know, things can be fixed or overdubbed or edited later, whatever. But if everyone's playing, everyone knows what everyone else is doing, and so they play to that, and they feel that. You know,
and they build something from that.
And you're building something from that. You're not just playing the drums and then the guitars and then the bass and then the vocals and these things that are then artificially perfect, which can be cool. I make records like that too that need to sound in that particular fashion. But the real passion I have is for making a live record in the studio as much as possible. And again, I don't have any rules. You know, like don't have to get this perfect right now. You know, that fine. That can be a scratch vocal or that can be a scratch part. That's fine. But we need to know how this is all going to fit together. And so we have all these things set up. I like to take a DI from guitars if I can, so I can, if we need to reamp it later, because we got to move fast to catch this inspiration. And if the guitar player doesn't have the perfect guitar sound, we can reamp it later, fix it, whatever. But we have that moment, we have that feeling, that character in his playing, because the drummer's right there. And he's seeing the drummer, and they're doing something together that's of the moment, and that will never happen again. No matter how much you want to try as an overdub, it won't be the same as sitting in the room, maybe in the same room as the drummer, maybe in the booth, or in the control room, who knows. But that moment will never happen again. And so if you have that DI, you can reamp it, fix it, whatever. And I've had to do that. I like to have the sound at the time, but you know, you can't spend an hour getting a guitar sound while the whole band is sitting around. So
because you need to move fast.
You need to move fast, and again keep that inspiration going. And so when I work with like Rick Rubin, we're doing 2, 3, 4 songs a day, in a short day, in a short span. And he's like, you know, let's keep this train rolling, because you know the band is hot. This, you know, let's not get bogged down in choosing whether this overdrive pedal is better than this, or you know, that kind of thing. Because if you get the feel right, and you use your basic skills as an engineer to get a great sound at the get-go, stay out of your own way, then it's going to be pretty great.
And then it's easier to build, mix, and produce.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Talking about drums, because we were on that subject first. You have different distinct sounds on Avett Brothers than on the Red Hot Chili Peppers sound. How do you mic those drum kits? I mean, what do you use generally? Maybe you have some things that you, I wouldn't say always do, but like what do you do, like ribbon microphones on the overheads or in rooms, or do you have this particular mic that you trash with a heavy compressor or distort, or what do you?
I mean, everything depends on everything else.
Yeah.
And so when I hear the band, well, first of all, you got to do your homework. So you have to listen to the band, their CDs beforehand, and I like to ask bands like, you know, what are you listening to? What are you into? And then I sort of decide what direction I want to go in with sounds. I mean, I love drum sounds. I'm a drummer. I'm obsessed. I love getting like really great drum sounds. I mean, I love getting great everything sounds, but drums in particular, I find a big challenge because of all the microphones you sort of need to get a modern.
The phase issues and stuff like that.
Yeah, the phase issues and tuning issues. There's so many different things involved in a great drum sound. It's a huge challenge. And so when you have a great drummer with a great drum set in a great room, it's so easy. Everything else is easy. Yeah. And whether you use this mic or that mic is sort of it's a personal preference. It's like, do you like sugar in your coffee? You know. Yeah. And I don't think. I mean, like, again, given a handful of really great mics, whether you use this one or that one doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not going to use a crappy mic, but you know, for a hi-fi sound, I like C12s as my overheads. I like Mojaves as overheads, but I also like Coles. You know, so it just depends on the flavor that you go for that day. And again, like, what preamps do you have and this sort of thing. Like, if you're going to have dark Coles microphones, you need sort of a bright preamp or something with a sweet top end. Yeah. So if you have a 1073, it's going to sound really good. Yeah. But C12s sound really great. 87s are good, 67s are good. They're all going to add their own little character, and it just depends on the instrument and the room.
And the drummer.
And oh yes, you know, that guy. Yeah. You know, so everything depends on everything. So you know, when you set that drummer up, I like to move the kick drum around and find the sweet low end spot in the room, and then sort of set up from there. And we'll build the kit and try some different microphones, things like this. I mean, intellectually, I'll think like, okay, well, there's this kind of room, there's this kind of issues in here, so I'm going to start with this microphone. And if that doesn't work, then I try something else. Yeah. You know, lately I've been into this AEA stereo mic as an overhead, but sometimes it doesn't work. You know, it's a bloom line, and so it looks at the ceiling, and if you have a really weird sounding room, it's not going to happen. You need something more directional. And so, you know, I use you know, we all have to use a certain amount of our intellect to choose microphones intelligently, but we don't always have a big mic locker to choose from, so we have to sort of use whatever we happen to have. I have a collection of microphones that I like, and so when all else fails, I have those, and I know they're going to work, and so I go with those. But yeah, I mean, kick drum, D112, D12, 421, you know, whatever's around. Snare drum, 57s, toms, I like 414s, 421s. Hi-hats, I like ribbon mics or a 57.
What did you use on Avett Brothers drum kit? Because it's really pristine and quite hi-fi compared to Blink-182 or, you know, Red Hot Chili Peppers stuff. What did you do? What did you use to get this pristine sound?
The Avets, yeah, it was a D112 on the inside, it's FET 47 on the outside, sub kick, 57s on the snare, 414s on the tom, C12s overheads. I think I had a pair of Royers and a pair of Mojaves as rooms, so 2 different flavors. Yeah. And then like I may have had a green bullet under the drum kit, you know, for a kind of my
vibe.
my stunt mic. Yeah, but you know, Blink-182 is very similar. It's like a, you know, but a very different drummer, a very different drum set, very different end product.
Travis is playing pretty loud.
Yeah, Travis is is the loudest drummer I've ever recorded.
Okay.
And hits harder than anybody I've ever met. And so you have to treat that very differently, and it's more about separation of sounds on that. And you know, Jerry had all these processes that we did to the toms, and
what you mean? Just
we had like
toms differently?
No, we just had like a parallel thing going during recording that we did with a BBE 422. And you know, it was very complicated with triggers and gates and things like that. But it was a pretty cool sound, and we needed it because he has those plastic drums, you know, the plexiglass drums. So there's no low end coming out of that drum kit at all. Everything was sort of manufactured.
Generated,
yeah.
Okay. So we were talking about Travis drum kits and drum sounds in general. Let's move on to some of the instruments like guitars, like, you know, keyboards, for example. But I found something on your records. The guitars always sound loud and proud, but never aggressive, never like a little bit in your face, but never like scraping your ears or whatever. It's always good. How do you manage to deal with those guitar sounds?
You know, it's same as drums. It's like it just depends on the player and the instrument and the amp and the room and the context of the sound. You know, because I'll treat guitars for a punk rock record very differently than I treat guitars for a folk record. But again, the end result, or you know, the process in terms of how I think about things is the same. You know, it's like, all right, we have to get a great sound that fits with these drums and with this song and expresses that expresses the identity of this band. You know, and you know, when we use good engineering practices, you know, keeping microphones, when you're using multiple microphones, checking that we're in phase alignment, you know, that we're in time alignment with the capsules, you know, by getting, you know, turning it up in the headphones and getting in there and listening for the null point, and moving the amp around, moving the microphones around, and getting the best possible sound as quickly as possible. And sometimes that means taking a day, you know, like on a Blink-182 record, there was no deadline, and so we would spend hours getting guitar sounds, because that's how that record was made. It was done like, okay, we do the drums, now we do the guitars, now we do the bass, and so it was getting the perfect sound for that. And that's what was cool about doing that record with Jerry. It's like, all right, let's try this guitar with this amp. Okay, now let's try this different guitar with this amp. And okay, now let's try them all together. You know, and okay, let's try this guitar with 3 different amplifiers and 6 different microphones with these preamps, some through a BCM10. That sounds pretty awesome. Okay, cool, let's play the part. And we would spend this time finding these sounds, because that became the identity of that sound. Because so many of those songs are, you know, so you have to make that sound awesome and different than the other time they play that in the other song that comes after that one. It's got to be different. It can't be the same. But on the Hewitt Brothers, it's like, hey, I'm going to plug my Strat into that Marshall. Okay. Is that the best? It's pretty good. Okay. I got my part. I'm ready. Okay. This is the sound, and we make that sound as you know, as appropriate as possible for that part. You know, and I'm exaggerating a little bit on both ends.
But
you know,
different
it's like
ways of working.
It's very different ways of working with different personalities and different bands, and you have to, I think, as an engineer who doesn't want to be pigeonholed and who wants to be able to do different genres of music, I have to be able to be aware. I have to be very aware of how these people like to work, and adapt quickly to that process. And if you don't, that, you know, you stay in one sort of thing. And to me, that's boring. Like, I don't want to make punk rock records every day. I love making those records. I love making Hewitt Brothers records. I don't want to make those every day either. I'd like to go this, and then I want to do a reggae record, and then I want to do this and this and this, and keep the job interesting, keep it fresh, and be influenced by all these different processes, so I can bring bits of them to other records. You know, like recording banjo with the Hewitt Brothers is different than recording banjo with Flogging Molly. But I can use bits of those processes and bits of those ideas and take them and put them in the other band, because they wouldn't think that way. Like Scott Hewitt doesn't think like Bob Schmidt from Flogging Molly, and vice versa. But I can say, hey, you know, how would Bob do it? And I can tell Scott, like, hey, you know, I know this might sound stupid, but what if you just strum chords on the banjo? And he's like, yeah, you know, that's cool in this song. Or like say to Bob, like, why don't you try X, Y, and Z? Oh yeah, cool. All right. And so we have this cross-pollination of ideas and processes that otherwise wouldn't happen. So that's really exciting to me.
Trying to get influenced by other ways,
yeah,
other styles, and
and at the end of the day, it's just the song has to speak, and you have to do what's appropriate for that situation. That's you know, that's the overarching idea in all of this, is just doing what's appropriate at that moment for that music and that band on that day.
It's always a matter of time.
It's it's so many things, time, materials, blah blah blah. I don't know. There's no rules. Do what sounds good.
But to make it sound good, you have some equipment. What do you have in your rig? Because you have such an arsenal in your setup. But you also have not only outboards, console monitors, microphones, but also like instruments, effects, stuff like that. I've read that you're an extensive user of UAD plugins, but also you have a summing mixer, Tonlux, I guess. You're a fan of Manage Chandler outboards. Wow. Can you tell us a bit more about all of this and how you built your identity through the outboard?
Well, I mean, I saw the home studio thing coming. I mean, how long ago was that now? Like 13 years ago. I saw the demise of studios coming, that it was imminent, that people were going to be bailing on these high-dollar big consoles and going home somehow. I didn't know it was going to be mixing in the box, or, you know, because that didn't really exist in a high-fidelity way at the time. You know, Pro Tools XL HD had just come out, you know, but I saw it coming, and I was just like, all right, I'm going to start buying equipment so that when this happens and when everything falls apart, I'm going to be ready. And so I sort of skated along with, you know, working in big studios and buying things that I thought were necessary that other studios didn't have. Like I bought a Transient Designer, and I bought distressors at the very beginning when they first came out. I bought myself a pair of Proax, because you got to have your own speakers that you know, that you were intimate with. Then I bought the amp and the speaker cables and these things like Michael Brower and Rick Rubin and all his guys. And then I started buying mic pre's. I bought a Chandler Chandler LTD1. Yeah. That was my first nice mic pre.
Replica of 1073.
Yeah, it's a 1073 sort of thing, but mine is serial number 39 or something, so it's got original Neve boards and Neve transformers in it from when Wade first started the company. And I still have it. I still use it all the time. And so I just started buying quality things that would help me get my sounds. That no matter where I went or whatever I was doing, I'd have something that was good. Is it the best? Maybe not, but it's really great. Yeah. And so I could take my little 4-space rack with a distressor and an LTD1 and whatever else I had at the time, and I could track anything, and I could have a couple things to mix with, and get things started. And so again, like, just started buying the things I needed for a studio. So a couple more compressors, then I found a headphone mixer randomly on eBay, ridiculously cheap. I'm like, cool, I'll buy that. And then, you know, Mogami cable, and then this, and then this, and and now I have this job recording Blink-182, so I have to put together a rack with a patch bay. So I went and put together my first rack with all my stuff and a patch bay and Mogami and that sort of thing. And again, worked in big studios for a long time, and then all of a sudden it became impractical to try to find budgets for all these mixes I was being offered. Like, yes, I can do this, but you have to pay $2,000 a day for the studio. They're like, what are you kidding? So I'm like, okay, well, I have to turn down enough work that I got to put together my own place. So I moved house and built my studio at home, and that was 6 years ago.
Wasn't that too difficult to set up a studio at home?
No. I mean, not practically, you know. Like, I finished a gig one day, I took all my stuff to my new house, I set it up, and I was working the next day. It wasn't the best studio in the world, and it took 2 or 3 years to really dial it in. And a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and emotional things that went with those. A lot of effort, you know, the money, this kind of thing. But it was great. I mean, I worked there for almost 6 years, and I just moved it out of the house over the summer into a big multi-room facility. So now I have, you know, a proper big control room that was designed by George Massenburg in the late 70s, along with a nice live room so I can record bands. And it's nice to be out of the house and like go to work. And when I come home, I don't work anymore.
And separate from, you know, personal and professional life.
It's important to have, you know, a certain amount of that separation, whether it's just going out to the backyard into the garage that you've turned into a studio, or, you know, driving 10 minutes to somewhere else. But that said, you know, the home studio worked for me for a long time, and I did a lot of big records there. I mean, I mixed all this Hewitt Brothers stuff in my home studio. And so, yes, I have my Tonelux mixer and lots of outboard gear that I use as hardware inserts, and sometimes on the way into the summing box. And yeah, it's developed from a very ad hoc process to a very fluid, specific way of working now. It's become very comfortable.
And so, what do you think of this evolution of working methods? Do you think it's on a good way, or on a, you know, different way, or how do you feel yourself into these new ways of working methods? Because it's it has some advantages, like recalls. We were.
Well, I'm of two minds about it. I mean, at first I hated it. When I first moved into my studio and I was mixing completely in the box, I'm like, this sucks. This is so not fun. But then UAD plugins came out. I'm like, oh, cool. Now I can like mix comfortably.
With tools you know.
With plugins and tools that are reminiscent of the ones that I know. Okay. And you know, and again, I keep buying more gear and just getting better as a mixer as time goes by. So now I'm very comfortable mixing with this hybrid setup. And there's advantages. I can do recalls in a few minutes, but that also can be a detriment, because it's like, oh, hey, can you just recall it for the 13th time and just, you know, take the shaker out of the second verse? Okay, yeah, we can do that. That's no problem. And so you sort of run into that a little bit. You know, but for clients it's great, and for budgets it can be really good. But I mix records of all statures. I mean, I mixed a Harry Connick record last year, and again, like Hewitt Brothers, things for Rick Rubin. So there's no shame in doing it however you need to do. In fact, during this seminar I just did, we did the first week on a 9K, on an SSL 9000, and the second week I was basically mixing in the box. And I was like, oh, I'm going to be so much faster in the 9K, it's going to be so cool to mix on a desk again. And it was the same. It took me about the same amount of time to get the mix together, and I was like, oh, I thought it was going to be so much faster on a desk. But it was just a different process, you know.
It's a different way of working.
It's a different way of working, and is one better than the other? I don't know. I don't think that it's absolutely, you know, this, I have to have this, or I have to have this. I mean, one of the things I was taught by all these people I worked for, and most especially my father, is just like, make do with what you have. You know, you can spend all day complaining that I don't have my this, or I don't have my that, or I don't have this microphone, so fuck, the whole world has to stop now. It's like, okay, I've got these things, and I've got this band, and I'm here to record. Let's go. Let's make a record.
That's a positive way of doing it.
That you have to be. If you're not positive, who wants to be around you? You know, who wants to hire you to be the mopey guy behind the desk making faces at out of tune notes, and you know, oh, I don't have my microphone, or oh, I don't have this guy, or oh, this guy sucks. It's like, okay, hey, let's do it again. Sounds great. I need you to do this, and this. Let's go for one more take. Okay, cool. That sounded good. I'm really I got to hone in on this one little thing here. Let's just punch in this one line, or let's punch in this one drum fill. It's like being positive and patient and encouraging with whoever you're working for. You know, I'll beat the crap out of my assistant and make him work for his paycheck, but with the musicians, it's all about support and being cool and encouraging, and you have to be that guy that they want to be around, because they're bearing their soul to you musically.
I understand. Yeah. Just to finish with gears, we were talking about.
I always take it away from gear.
No, that's all right, because you're making the bridge between, you know, parts that I want to talk about with you. I just want to know a bit more about your mix bus processing chain, because you were talking about recalls, but what do you use as a mix bus? You know, compression, EQ, whatever. How do you print mixes? How many versions? What kind of converters? Because these are issues that we have to deal with.
Sure. So I come out of my summing bus, and I have a stereo bus processing chain that I have an API 2500 compressor that I've had modified, and it's got some cool stuff on it.
Okay.
And then I have that goes into my Chandler curve bender, and then I have an NTI EQ3, the two-space air EQ that I love. And they don't all get used all the time.
But they're plugged.
But they're plugged in, and so I can turn them on and try them out, and if I don't like them, I take them out. No big deal. Okay. What else do I have? I think that's about it. I mean, I have
converters?
For my mix bus, I use a Burl B2, which sounds phenomenal. It's like it's got a sound, you know. So it's definitely got a vibe to it, and makes its own sort of thing.
Okay.
So that's really exciting sounding. Yeah, and again, sometimes I use them, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I use all of them intensely, and sometimes just
one.
Yeah, sometimes just one, and sometimes just a little bit. But you know, they're great tools to have, and I really like having them.
And part of your personality in mixing.
Yeah, you know, because the API is pretty brutal sounding sometimes.
Yeah.
It can be tough, and that's fun, but it can also be used in a more gentle manner when the song calls for it. And I also have an Elysia Empressor that I use sometimes in the stereo bus. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there's different flavors. My next purchase will be a Smart C2, so I really like that.
Okay.
VCA style.
Do you print stems for the mixes, or
I try to avoid it.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean, I'll do the main mix. You know, lead vocal up, background vocals up, all the vocals up. Yeah. If there's any contentious issue, like if there's like, you know, man, I don't know if the guitars are loud enough, I'll, you know, or like they're happy and someone mentions something about something at some point in the mix, I'll print one, you know, up and down just to have it in case. You know, it's like I'd rather spend the 10 minutes now than, you know, having to do a recall
later,
a month later or something like that. Because like, oh shit, you know, I wish we made this louder or took that out or whatever. I'll just make a mental note, and then at the end of the day I'll print those mixes. And then yeah, instrumental mix, you know, a cappella. Some people still ask for TV mixes.
The tracks,
yeah. I avoid stems at the moment, because unless someone wants them. I don't think that stems ever add up to be the mix that you made, because of, you know, the way I do my bus processing and things like that. But if they want them, I'll print them, and sometimes, depending on what I'm doing with the bus compressor, I'll leave that on or off. But it, you know, again, it never adds up right, and no one's given me stems and said turn these stems back into the mix. So it's a difficult conundrum. But if they want them for remix purposes or whatever, oh yeah, of course. I mean, they can have them. I don't care. That's fine.
Okay. You talked about assistants, and I would like to talk with you about the evolution of the business and the apprenticeship, you know, stuff. And so, do you have assistants today? And how do you see the evolution of the music industry?
Well, I mean, as I was saying earlier, I think that this is a very apprenticeship-driven career in business. Everything depends on experiences. You know, where your trajectory of your career depends on where you've been, what you've done, who you've worked with, this sort of thing. And so, I've gotten to assist for some pretty great people. They've, you know, a lot of people have given me a chance, and some have taken me under their wings and taught me what they know, and I've been able to run with that. There's been very, very kind people in this business for me, and so I feel a sort of moral obligation to continue that and to keep that going. And so I've had a few assistants over the years. I mean, I've had my studio for 6 years, and I've had a few guys. Some have worked out better than others for extended periods of time, or not. I just think it's important to, because I don't consider myself anything in this business, but as someone who has a voice in this business, I feel it's important to be able to teach what I know and what I've experienced to the next generation, to guys coming up. And so I get emails from people wanting to intern and whatnot, and I'm trying to put together some kind of program to be able to take people and educate them for longer stints. Okay. In different manners. Now that my studio's out of the house, it will make it a little bit easier. So I'm working to get this sort of program going, and this is why I've started Studio Prodigy in America and why I want to do these seminars over here in Europe. But you know, the assistant, anyone who wants to work for me has to be tough. You know, like they have to know what's going on and want to work. Like, don't ask me what time we're going home tonight. You ask me that, you're fucking out the door. You know, ask me what can I do for you when you leave tonight? What can I do after you're gone tonight? Because I mean, and I've told several guys this. I'm like, if you want this seat, you got to work harder than me. You got to stay here longer, be here earlier, and not be concerned with things outside the studio. If you want to be successful in this business, you got to be ahead of me, and that's hard because I work fast, and I know a lot, and I've been through many things in this business. But to get to the next level, you got to be ahead of the guy who's sitting in the chair you want to be in. Very important. You know, if the artist isn't there, someone says he's hungry, you have the menu book out. No one has. If you have to be asked for something, you're behind. You've fallen behind whoever it is that's asking you this question. If I have to ask you to sharpen a fucking pencil, you've fallen behind. If I have to ask you to do the recall, you're not paying attention. Like, people need, like, the assistant needs to be on point all the time. It's an exhausting job. But I know that I was a good assistant, and I know that there are ways I could have been better. I was just thinking about it this morning. I was like, man, there were some things I did that should have gotten me fired. But I didn't. You know, it didn't happen, thankfully. But, you know, I got beaten up, and I beat up my assistants, and it's like I expect a certain amount from these guys. And I've written a handbook about things I want and things I expect, things that they need to be doing so that it's formalized. So when the new guy walks in, it's like, okay, here's your list of shit. If you're not down with this, there's the door. I don't need you here. And I don't mean it to be like an asshole, but I've got a job to do. And if you're holding me back from doing my job, if I have to teach you everything, if I have to teach you how to place a food order and how to take money from a band and go and buy food and give them change appropriately, why are you here? Why am I can't be teaching you that. I'm here to mix a record, and you're here to take care of the band that's hanging out while I'm mixing the record, or tracking, or whatever. If you can't get that together, you can't do a recall. It's just not going to happen. There's basic things you need to learn in a studio, and you know, these are sort of there's a lot of life lessons that if you haven't experienced, if you haven't worked hard to get to the point where I'm hiring you, then we can't continue. And sometimes that's not apparent right away, and it makes it a little difficult. But whoever I'm going to hire has to be has to be smart, has to have some serious intelligence, and like, they don't have to be the best engineer in the world. I'm not hiring them to be an engineer. I'm hiring them to be my assistant. You know, I will teach them how to mix and how to record and these kind of things. But you need to have some life experience that enables you to do basic tasks and to learn and to absorb information and to be aggressive and assertive with the things that you need to do. With the assistant, speaking to the assistant. Yeah. So it's a tough gig, and that's it's unfortunate that these positions are fewer and farther between now, with guys having their own studios. But I think that there are many opportunities in this business for the guys who want them, you know. And if you aggressively pursue friendships with people and advice from people, I mean, maybe not everyone's going to write back to you. If you send an email to 30 engineers that you want to emulate, maybe one will write you back, 2, and maybe one of them won't. Maybe that guy won't, you know, want you to be his assistant or whatever you want. But reaching out and trying to advance your career in any way possible, I think, is important. And I don't answer all these emails. Like, I can recognize, like, oh, this is difficult, or I don't want a guy from Timbuktu to move to California to be my assistant. I can't, you know, that's not the sort of thing I'm looking for. But to again insert yourself into the place you want to be, to go to these AES shows, to go to conventions, meet people, hang out, and just be part of the scene, part of the experience is I think how one can advance in today's business. We can all buy gear, we can all buy this stuff. How are we all going to make records? How are we going to advance to the next level?
But we are first to learn how to work.
Yes, first we have to learn how to order sandwiches.
I think that's what we're going to do, actually.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Just to finish with this interview, I'd like to ask you the Bernard Pivot style,
okay.
the 5 questions that I always ask. What's your favorite memory about working on an album? If there's any that you can pick and just say, okay, that's something that I really loved doing and that I remember, like being a great moment.
Probably, I mean, the one that sticks in my mind is when I was engineering the Chili Peppers Stadium Arcadium. Flea came in for, like, we had the basic tracks were done. I'd done a lot of work with John, and this was after years of working with John, but particularly this moment, Flea came in to do a couple days of bass fixes, and we're doing some punches on tracks he'd already played, and he played one particular thing, and he says, cool, all right, and the next thing I'm like, and I said to him, I'm like, I think you could do that better. He's like, what? And he just kind of looks at me like, really? And I said, yeah. I was like, I like it, but I think that the timing could be a little bit better. And he's like, play that back for me. And he listens to it. He's like, yeah, okay, yeah, I see what you mean. All right, let's do it again. But if I don't play it better, I'm gonna be really upset with you. And I said, okay. And I turned around to I turned my back to him to the tape machine remote, and I'm sitting like, holy shit! I just told Flea he could do it better. And I'm sitting there like, I'm rolling the tape back, and I'm contemplating this punch, and I'm just like, fuck. This is cool. I'm recording my favorite band, and I just told Flea to do it again. I'm like, I'm here. I have a career. I have a career now. I'm excited. Hey Mom, I got a career now. I just told Flea to do it again, and he said okay. But that moment was like, I went home walking on a cloud, because he did it again, and he's like, yeah, that sounds so much better. And I don't even remember what song or what part or whatever. It's totally inconsequential. But the fact that I could turn to someone like Flea, who was my childhood hero of the bass, and say, do that again, I'm like, oh, okay,
achievement.
I'm here.
Yeah.
This is great. Yeah. That was a very exciting moment.
Okay, we're talking about the best, the worst memory that you have, if there's any. If you don't want to say names.
The worst memory is when I erase something by accident.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember who it was or what happened, but I erased something on a tape, and I was like, oh fuck. I was like, I just erased that. And the guy on the other end on the mic was like, that's cool, I'll just sing it again. Don't worry about it, not a problem. And my heart just sank. I was so bummed. And I had to really gather myself together. I had to put on okay, and then just drop in and replace whatever it was that we erased, and I was just I'm so sorry. He's like, don't mention it, no problem. I just sang it better anyway, so it's not a big deal. I was just mortified.
Oh my God. But you were lucky to have this kind of
but again, if everything's cool, and fortunately everything was fine, and that's just how it went.
Cool.
Yeah.
Which artists would you like to work with, and why?
I go back and forth on this. I mean, the Police were my favorite band when I was very young, and I have this idea of working with one of them, like with Stewart or Sting or Andy. But then I'm like, but those guys are my heroes. I don't know if I could do that. That would break the barrier for me to work with them, possibly, because I've heard that they're very difficult people. But I mean, who knows? Maybe that will happen someday or not. There's two people. I'd like to work with Dave Grohl. I think that would be really fun in some capacity. And I'd like to work with Paul Weller. because I've loved his music since I was a kid, and I've bought every single record he's ever made, and he's just got this style that just doesn't give a fuck. You know, he's so brash and just like he's just so unique. He's got this voice. He's got such a great band, and he's just got complete control of what he does. And I so admire that. But again, like, I'm afraid of, like, if I work with someone whose records I admire, what happens then? It's like the being John Malkovich. When you get into that position, it's like you're seeing it through these eyes that are not yours, and all of a sudden you're making the record the way you would make it. But is that interfering with what you like about those records? You know, like, I love the Doves, but again, like, I listen to those records as an enjoyment. Like, I listen to them in the car, I listen to them at home on the stereo, and I don't think about it from a production standpoint. And then all of a sudden I took those records into my studio. I'm like, God, these records sound terrible. These are really bad. I want to make these records and make them sound awesome. But part of those records is the sound that they have, and it's just like Paul Weller's sound is so strange, for lack of a better term. And the Doves records sound like their first two records sound that way because they did it themselves in their little studio, and they sound amazing. Do they sound like I would make them? Not at all. You know, I would do something probably very different, and maybe they would like that, and maybe it would be a good combination. I don't know, but I'm always afraid of you know, wanting to work with the bands that I so admire for that reason.
I understand. I see what you mean. That can be tough.
The conundrum.
Yeah. You're engaged to mix or record an album that you love, but you're only asked to use 5 pieces of equipment. 5 pieces of equipment. What do you choose?
Well, 5 pieces of recording equipment, or
mixing, whatever. Wait, you do an album, record and mix.
I can only bring 5 things.
Yeah. You can say you're 500 racks, but there are a lot of toys in there.
That's I don't know. That's a good one. Probably an 1176 because it's the best compressor ever made. Probably my speakers. Yeah.
Proax Studio.
I bring my Proax. That's a tough one because I have to. I don't know. Do I have to bring microphones? Are there microphones there? I don't know about this question.
Things that you couldn't work without.
Things I couldn't work without. So if I show up at a studio, the things I have to have. So yeah, I'd have to have my speakers. I would love to have an 1176. I'd probably bring my Chandler TG2. It's my favorite mic pre. I don't know if I'd bring my 500 rack because it doesn't have a whole lot of recording stuff in it. It's got mostly mixing stuff in it. I'd bring my my lunch truck, as I call it, because it's a 12-space 500 series rack that I had made, and it's got a bunch of other Chandler mic pre's and Tone Lux EQs and things like that. Okay, so that's 4. Yeah. And shit, I'd have to bring. What microphone would I bring that I could record everything with?
47, 67.
Yeah, I guess if we're wish listing things, yeah. I don't know about a 47. Maybe a FET 47.
Okay.
Because that you can record more stuff with, and it sounds pretty great. Like, you can do vocals, and no, I take it back. I'd bring a UMT 70, because that you can record everything with, and it sounds really great.
Okay. Great. So you did it. Finally. Good.
That was tough.
Finally, do you have any leitmotif quote or sentence that you like to use to define your work ethics, methods, the job you're working in?
Well, I mean, my father has a lot of great quotes, like a lot of one-liners that he's accumulated over the years, and I don't know if they're his or if he's stolen them from other people, but I mean, at the end of the day, to me, if it sounds good, it is good. It doesn't matter how you got there, what you used to get it, what time it is, any of these things. If at the end of the day you think you have something that sounds great, that's all that matters, you know. gear. I love gear. I buy tons of shit, and so it's completely hypocritical of me to say this, but it doesn't matter. Like, if you have some stuff that you know how to use to get a great sound, that's what's most important. I collect all this stuff. I collect guitars and pedals and keyboards and things like this so I can make better records, and I can provide opportunity to musicians who otherwise might not have a great Les Paul, you know, or a Marshall, or like some basic rudimentary studio tools that I know I can plug in and get a great sound. But at the end of the day, none of it really matters, you know. Just make it sound great. It's that simple. Just voila, make it sound great.
Perfect final word.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Ryan, for this interview.
Thank you for having me.
Cool.
Yeah, man.